Hello and welcome to Documentarians and Their Quest. I'm your host, Marshall Stearn, and my guest today is Jennifer Steinman. She is co-founder of the film company Smush Media. Jennifer is a director, producer, and editor. The current project which we're going to delve into, what was the genesis for Motherland?
Well, Motherland was, it was inspired by a friend of mine who's actually one of the women who's in the film. She's been a good friend for years, and about 4 years before I came up with the idea, she had lost her son in a car accident. And I had certainly known people that had passed before and known people who had lost people, but I had never known anyone to lose a child before, and it was a very specific kind of grief, a very devastating experience, and and just watching her over the years go through her process and deal with her grief, and it was really, it was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed, and in a lot of ways she was, it was amazing to me that she was even able to get up and get out of bed every day,
Do they just go through the motions? I mean, they know they have to do something, and I guess someone says it just sucks the life out of them once they, parents are not supposed to outlive their children.
Yeah.
So she was, so continue on with that first impression and relationship.
That had happened, and I had, been watching her over the years going through her process. And then separate from that, I was planning a trip for myself to go to Africa, and I had been really drawn to go to Africa. I'd been reading a lot about Africa and seeing a lot in the news, and wanting to really go there and do some volunteer work. I've always done a lot of volunteering over the years, and I've always just really believed that volunteering is a very healing thing to do. So I had this summer where I was planning a trip to Africa and wanted to go do some volunteer work and thinking about volunteering being healing. And I just had this day where I thought about the trip, and I thought about my friend on the same day, and I thought to myself, wow, could that be a healing thing for her to go do? Like someone who's really been through something traumatic, could going and doing some volunteering be healing? And then the idea just started to grow.
What was her response to that suggestion?
Yeah, well, I called her and I said, I had this crazy idea, and what do you think of this? And she immediately burst into tears, and she just said, that's exactly what I need. That's exactly what I need. I need something like that, and absolutely, I want to go. Let's do it. And so the idea grew from there, and the next thing I knew, it was a group of women who'd all been through what she'd been through, and 6 months later, we were all in Africa.
Now, how did you find the other women? Did your first friend, did she belong to a group of women who talked about the trauma?
She didn't belong to a group, but she did have a grief counselor that she'd been seeing, and I contacted that grief counselor, and I did end up finding a couple of the other women through her referrals. And then what I did was I sent out a blast email, and I describing the project, describing what I was looking for, and I sent it out to grief groups, counseling centers, children's hospitals, just all over. And I wasn't really thinking I'd get that many responses from that, but it was just another avenue to try. And what ended up happening is in about a 48-hour period, I got about 100 responses.
That must have been very difficult
to
choose from 100 down to 6
yeah,
who had similar experiences.
Yeah,
What was the criteria, or is it?
Well, a lot of it was just my gut, to be honest.
Right.
And trying to put together a group. I really wanted the group to be varied. I wanted it to be diverse. I also wanted it to be a diverse, as far as how their children died, and what the different experiences were, the different ways that their children passed.
How big of a crew did you have when you went over there to film this documentary?
There were 6 of us on the crew, so I had 2 camera women, 2 sound people, myself, and a field producer.
How many hours of footage did you shoot?
I think think we've shot about 100 hours.
100 hours. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, when the women were there, did they have they had to acculturate themselves to the environment, and there were people there to help them. What did they do with the children, per se? Or were they just there to observe the culture, or were they active with children who might have lost their mothers to AIDS, or what were they doing?
We did a bunch of different things while we were there. They worked primarily in daycare centers where some of the children are orphaned. Some of them are in kinship situations where they're living with, grandparents, aunts, uncles. But they're all basically there because their families are too poor to take care of them during the day. And we're talking about schools where they have, normally 200 kids to about 3 or 4 adults. So when you come in there with 6 more adults to volunteer and help out, you get swarmed by children. And then, they led a grief workshop for some children who have lost family members from AIDS and HIV. They worked in a disabled school one day. So it was a varied program, but they did a little bit of everything.
So they helped out where they could.
Absolutely.
And did the people accept them? You come into a culture, this westernized culture, and did they have a difficult time adjusting to a different society with different values and kitchens that they would probably have never? What was their attitude there? Was there any kind of I don't know if I can do this, or was it totally positive, or there some trepidation?
The women that I brought, they were no, I think they were incredibly willing. They definitely came there, with servants' hearts ready to give, and they knew that that's what the trip was about. And I certainly, prepped everybody on that. Right. That's what this trip was about. This trip was about making yourself of service, right. and how could, and by placing yourself in service, how could that be a healing right. thing? So I really, there wasn't really any.
So when you talked about healing, which we talked about before the program, which is kind of a pop buzzword, and what exactly was the process of healing for them?
It's so interesting. I definitely had some ideas about what I thought would be healing about the trip before we went on the trip, and there were many other things that happened that were unexpected that I actually think are where the real magic of the trip happened. I thought that, because they had lost their children, that working with these children would be the most healing thing. That having connecting with these children who perhaps had lost parents too, that there would be a connection there, which there certainly was. But what I think the real magic of the trip was, and what happened that I didn't expect so much, was the connection that happened between the 6 of them as a group, and how that really spoke to the difference between Western culture and the African culture, which is that in Western culture we really tend to grieve alone, and that what these 6 women, the reality of their lives when they're here at home in America, is that they really are isolated. They really don't know anybody else who's been through what they've been through. And I think in our culture, when we grieve, when we cry, we go into our bedroom and we close the door and we climb under our covers and we cry by ourselves. And then we got to Africa, and you have these communities of women where almost everybody's lost a child, and where they don't have, bedroom doors to go hide behind, and they really grieve together. Right. And even though, numbers-wise, there's more grief there.
We're running out of time.
Oh, we are.
I wish we had more time, but Jennifer,
well, they'll just have to watch the film.
Right. I want to thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to interview you about this great film.
Thank you.
So, if you have any questions, Jennifer has a website that you can see, or email,